So I wanted to ask, because it's not just the 10,000, or sorry, the 12,000 a year, or 24,000 for a couple. It's the pay for of that, and also the terms and conditions. So I've looked at various estimates of how this would end up getting paid for, and I have to tell you, most of the estimates I've read suggest that your pay-fors are going to fall well short of the $2.8 trillion a year that it would cost to do that. So that's one question about it. And the second is the fact that, when we talk about this 12,000 a year, that's 12,000 that Ivanka Trump and 12,000 that Jared Kushner are going to get. The idea that this is not focused on the people who are actually bearing the brunt of all the changes you're talking about, I think is a real puzzle for a lot of people, and I'd like to hear you discuss why that isn't a defect in this plan.
So Alaska, which has had this dividend in effect for almost 40 years, where now everyone in the state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year in oil money, passed this and said everyone's going to get it from the richest Alaskan to the poorest. And there are many, many benefits to this. There is no stigma attached to it. There's no need to report your income or any changes in your circumstances. It's not that I'm paying for it and you're getting it. And it's universally popular. So here in the U.S., if we say everyone gets $1,000 a month as a right of citizenship, then that's something that everyone can get excited about immediately. Now, there are several reasons why I'm not worried about the Ivanka Trumps of the world. As you likely know, I want to pay for this through a value-added tax that would fall most heavily on the big winners of the 21st century. So someone like Ivanka would end up paying hundreds of thousands of dollars into the system. And so if we try and send her $1,000 a month to remind her she's an American, it's immaterial in the scheme of things. And the benefits towards making it universal are much, much higher than if we have to try and ascertain whether these people truly live together, like whether they got a fake divorce so that one of them could report zero income so they could get an extra $1,000 a year. All of the administrative issues essentially disappear, and this becomes something that we can all get behind as owners and shareholders of the richest, most advanced economy in the history of the world. Do you want me to talk about the pay for?
Yes.
So the pay for, right now, if you have the Amazons and Netflixes of the world paying literally zero in taxes, and then the other big winners like Apple, Google, Microsoft parking tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in profits overseas because they want to avoid paying taxes here in the U.S., then you have a consistent revenue problem that is just going to rise over time. And one of the examples I use, let's say a company comes up with artificial intelligence software that displaces most of the 2.5 million Americans who work in call centers right now, making between $10 and $14 an hour. How much tax revenue will we see from the AI company? And the answer is probably nothing or next to nothing, because the AI company will have been bought by Amazon or Google, who will then park the revenue someplace else or not pay anything in taxes. Meanwhile, all of those 2.5 million call center workers right now do pay taxes. And so we're going to have this growing revenue problem over time as software and technology do more of the work. If you want to put it in the simplest terms, robots don't pay taxes. And so if you have more and more work being done by machines, technology, software, and artificial intelligence over time, you are in a bit of a bind. Other countries have looked at this and said you can't have trillion-dollar tech companies like Amazon paying zero in taxes, so they have a value-added tax at the point of sale. It's very hard to game your way out of, generates significant revenue from the people that are winning the most. And one tremendous thing about the value-added tax is you can scale it up on things like AI and yachts and luxury watches, and then exempt it or reduce it on diapers, milk, toilet paper, and things that everyday Americans consume. Conservatively, an effective value-added tax at even half the European level generates almost $1 trillion in revenue with a giant up arrow attached to it, because that level is going to increase over time. That's a huge down payment on this $1,000 a month for each of us. After we get the $1,000 a month, if we manage to sneak into Jeff Bezos's bank account and give him $1,000 a month, what impact would that have on the U.S. economy? Zero. He wouldn't even know. No one would know. It'd just be like a digit changed. If you put $1,000 a month in the hands of one of the 78% of Americans who's living paycheck to paycheck, or the 50% plus who can't afford an unexpected $500 bill, what does that impact on the economy? We know they're going to spend virtually all of it, and they're going to spend most of it where they live. And that money is not going to stay just in that one transaction. It's going to circulate over and over again. When you look at the pay for on this, people are underestimating the second order economic benefits of having this money flow through the economy. You would get back hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue from the new economic growth from the trickle up economy, because people would be spending more and more persistently. You'd also save billions on things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room healthcare that we spend tens, hundreds of billions on right now. It was a corrections officer in New Hampshire who said to me, we should pay people to stay out of jail because we spend so much when they're in jail. We think we're saving money by not investing in people, but we end up spending more in more expensive and punitive ways when they hit our institutions. And the last thing is that if you put this money into our hands, it increases our GDP by $700 billion a year just by better health and education outcomes. And this is not taking into account the massive catalyst to entrepreneurship, creativity, risk-taking, and new businesses and nonprofits that would form if people did not feel like they were going to starve to death if something did not work out.
Let's move on. We asked readers to send in questions.
And how much of them were about $1,000 a month?
Actually, the range of reader questions we got for you was kind of amazing, and a lot of smart questions.
Oh, good.
So let me ask one, and then maybe you, Molly, can go next. Sue from Oakland, California, to ask a very specific one, says, adjunct professors teach 70% of the classes at college, but only make a fraction of what tenured professors are paid. Most don't receive health insurance, and there's no realistic pathway to permanent full-time job. What would you do to help them?
She's right. And what's happened to adjunct professors is morally bankrupt. You have these universities that have figured out that they have this pool of labor that they can systematically exploit. In the old days, they would feel like they had to put someone on a tenure track in order to teach for the long term. But now they've figured out that there's an oversupply of PhDs, and they can get away with pushing them around. I am for the rights to organize among these adjunct professors. I know some of them have pushed for it. We need to see that they're treated better. But I want to speak to what that is emblematic of. So we have universities that have gone up 2.5 times in cost over the last number of years. Have they improved 2.5 times in quality? No. But everyday Americans look up and say, oh my gosh, how many of you all are parents like me? So if you're a parent, you're looking up saying, what? College costs what? A year? You know, we're looking at what? If you have 2 kids, you're looking at $500,000 in tuition for many of these schools. And parents feel like they have no choice but to pay. So then what does the government do? The government says, we'll give you loans. So you're up to $1.6 trillion in student loan debt and counting. And the underemployment rate for recent college graduates is 40 to 44%. So if you are a college, what is your accountability? If you raise prices, what happens? Well, it's tougher on families, but they'll just get the loans from the government. It's tougher on your graduates, but no, at that point they're out of your hair. And so what are your incentives as a university to try and keep your costs under control? Not very high. What are your incentives to treat your adjunct professor like a human being? Vanishingly low, because you've got an ever-replenishing pool of people who want to do that job because many Americans just dreamt about being a professor. And if you're a university, then theoretically you can do no wrong because you're a nonprofit. and like no one's going to come to you and say, hey, some of these practices are really bad for the country.
So your solution is?
Number one, you say to the universities, hey, let's try and get your administrator to student ratio down to what it was in the 1990s. Because the main reason your costs have gone up 250% are that your administrator to student ratio has gone up 150%. You are not spending the money on faculty. You're not spending the money on things that are actually going to impact the educational experience. You become these overgrown, complex bureaucracies where you have many non-faculty administrators doing jobs that did not even exist a couple of decades ago. So you get a lot of money from the government in various ways. You enjoy tax-exempt status from the government. So we're going to now hold your feet to the fire and say you have to get your ratios down. Not going to do it all at once, but get your ratios down over this period of time. The universities will say, this is impossible. We can't do it. And then you'll look at them and say, well, I think you'll figure it out. And as they do figure it out, we will realize that a significant proportion of these administrators have zero impact on the student experience. Students would not even notice that they're gone, and that these schools just needed someone to actually hold them accountable for annual price increases. I mean, here, and this is not just schools. I mean, like health insurance companies, every year, what's their business model? Let's just jack up the prices a little bit. There are three core sources of inflation in American life that are driving us all miserable: housing, education, and healthcare. Now, unfortunately, those three are like the pillars of American life and a middle-class existence. So if your wages and compensation stay essentially the same, but then I jack up the price of college every year and I jack up the price of your health insurance every year, then you become increasingly unhappy and miserable. That's what's happening to the American people right now. And this is, again, a space where the government looks up and is like, well, I guess it's appropriate that we're charging this much or you're charging this much because you're the boss. And at some point, the government has to say, wait a minute, this is all functioning as a massive system of taxation on our people. And that's not right. Like, these organizations have to actually start trying to keep the public good in mind and not just their own growth. So this is all a long-winded way of saying we need to treat adjunct professors better because these universities will not do it themselves.